All right, thank you for hanging in there with us for this awesome panel that we're about to learn from. And this is I'm Susan Heegaard. I'm the president of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. We are recording this session, and we save the best for last, you know. So can the folks online hear us well enough? Yeah. And then good, I got a thumbs up. And then I want to make sure that Nancy Roy, who is joining us, that she's able to hear us clearly. She's the thumbs up. Great. Thank you. Double thumbs up, Nancy. So the goal of this presentation is to increase awareness about mental health challenges on campuses and approaches used to address challenges, programs, and policies in ways that states can support institutions and students. I want to make sure that I've introduced myself already, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to get to know these folks before they present. We really want to provide a robust and informative discussion on the challenges of student mental health and why we wanted, that's why we wanted to bring this particular group together so that you can have some best practices and solutions to draw from. Some of the folks are from Ohio, some are national. So that's wonderful to have kind of a mix of that. And I'm going to start by asking you to introduce yourselves. I'll pass the mic down. Nancy, if you'd go last, I think that'd be easiest. And then Jennifer's going to provide some comments before Nancy goes through her slides to set the context for the conversation.
Good morning. I'm LaTasha Sullivan. I go by she, her, hers. I am the director at the University of Toledo Counseling Center. We have about a staff of 9 and a campus of about 15,000. And I've been in this role for 3 years. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks. I'm Ken Browner. I am the psychologist at Lakeland Community College, which is outside of Cleveland in Lake County, Ohio. And I've been there for about 20 years in my role. In addition to providing direct services to students, I'm responsible for helping the campus meet the needs of students facing mental health difficulties.
Hi, everyone. My name is Markie Pasternak, and I'm here representing Active Minds. We are one of the national folks that was referred to, and we are a nonprofit that leads in serving youth and young adult mental health, both in K through 12 and on college campuses. And I serve as the senior manager for higher ed. It's nice to be back here in the Midwest. I live in the South, but I'm originally from Wisconsin and went to Indiana. So it's nice to be back.
Thanks. I think you all know me, Jennifer Dahlquist with MEC, and my role here today is I oversee MEC's work in student health.
Why don't you keep the mic? Nancy's you're gonna do some opening remarks on student health, and then Nancy will give.
Thanks. So several years ago, MEC received.
Nancy.
Okay, so I'll go. Thanks for allowing me to join virtually. I was unable to travel, so thank you for still allowing me to be part of this. I'm Nancy Roy. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for the JED Foundation. I think most of you may know of the JED Foundation, but just in case, and some of you are JED campuses, so go to you guys. The JED Foundation is a nonprofit that promotes, its mission is to promote positive mental health and reduce suicide among teens and young adults. So as many of you know, we work in probably now well over 400 colleges and universities across the country, as well as we just started a high school program a couple of years ago. So that is growing rapidly as well, looking at policies, programs, systems, looking at student attitudes and behaviors. And so my role is to serve as a consultant, to do talks like this. We're getting actually more and more requests from workplace organizations as well around how they can best promote employee mental health and help managers do the same. So interesting times, timely topic, and I'm happy to be here.
All right. Well, thanks, Nancy. Nancy and I connected several years ago at the University Risk Management Insurance Association conference. So I came at student health really from a risk management perspective, as you're all familiar with my work in our property insurance program. But back in about 2009, 2010, MEC received a grant from Lumina Foundation to look at ways to reduce costs, create efficiencies in the area of student health. And back then we put together a student health benefits advisory committee and created a program which we affectionately call MEC Care, And that first issued its first policy in the 2012-13 policy year. The Kansas Board of Regents is our founding member of Medicare. And that provides student health insurance to today over 55,000 students across the US. We have robust participation from our sister compacts as well. Ohio is one of our strongest states. We insure Bowling Green, Cleveland State, Ohio University, the Ohio State University, and the University of Cincinnati. And later this week, I have conversations with Kent State, so hopefully we'll be seeing them participate as well. But that program has lasted for many years, and we got to the point where we needed to do a new RFP. This was actually pre-COVID, so in fall of 2019, our Student Health Benefits Advisory Committee started working on that RFP and stepped back and said, as we're looking at student health, are there other components of student health that we should be looking at from a MET perspective? And so our committee very intentionally added virtual mental health services to that RFP. And then, of course, COVID hit and our RFP timeline was completely crashed. But fortunately, we persevered and quickly flipped to a virtual RFP process. And we did result in 2 contracts for virtual mental health providers. We work with Meta Teletherapy and Tau Connect. They both provide services that I kind of think of as the opposite ends of the spectrum. I look at Tau as providing tools that wraps around existing services that a campus may have. And then Meta actually provides therapy to colleges and universities, and that can be complementary to services they have on campus, or if they don't have mental health services, an option that they can offer to institutions. I will say that the journey of launching those 2 initiatives has been challenging, and you'll probably hear today from a lot of the panelists on how this is such an important issue to higher education, but I think campuses are struggling with how to respond and what is the best approach moving forward with mental health services to institutions. So without further ado, I will get to the good part, the part where you're all here for our panelists. But one piece I did want to mention as well is, even though I have these initiatives on the on the risk management side of the aisle, on the policy research side of the aisle, they have also done a lot of research on student mental health. So I encourage you to seek out those resources as well. So with that, I think Nancy's up first, right?
Mute. Nancy, you're
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to unmute. So I just put together a few slides to set the stage for the panel discussion. Really looking at mental health on campus, both before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and I wish I could say since the pandemic, but I am a skeptic there. So go ahead, you can flip. I did just mention about who we are. I will just say that we were founded 23 years ago now by a couple, Donna and Phil Satow, whose son Jed died by suicide when he was in college. And when they spoke with the administrators around that time, they really walked away with the feeling accurately that not a whole lot was being done around, certainly around suicide prevention or even mental health broadly defined in the college population. So that motivated them to start the foundation, and here we are today. Next. So the issues that we're facing, I'm sure this will come as no surprise to any of you. This is for some reason, the source didn't show up on the slide, but it's the American Association of College and Universities, Healthy Minds, and the National College Health Assessment data. And this is in the past year, so the questions were phrased in the past 12 months. 2 out of 3 college students reported feeling overwhelming anxiety. Half felt too depressed to function. That means, getting out of bed, getting to class, engaging in campus activities. 1 out of 3 binge drinking regularly. We did see a slight decline in binge drinking during the pandemic. And we assume, or the hypothesis is that since many students were home, there were less opportunities to engage in binge drinking. I don't think that was true for the adult population in our country. I think alcohol abuse and misuse was on the rise for adults. but not for students. 1 out of 8 abusing prescription drugs. This is one that I in particular think we need to focus on very closely. While most colleges still tell us that alcohol and marijuana are the 2 top misused substances, we know that there's an opioid crisis in our country, and folks abusing prescription drugs. And I don't think it'll be long before we see a rise in this on our campuses. So we strongly encourage you to keep an eye on that and sort of get ahead of the curve, if you will, by providing information about the dangers of either sharing your medication or taking someone else's medication, combining it with alcohol. Very, very dangerous. And I think it's something we need to be on the lookout for. 2 out of 5 struggling with food insecurity. And, food and housing insecurity have really risen to the top of mind for all of us, I think, in the past, say, 4 or so years. But before that, I don't think we really thought about college students facing food insecurity. Perhaps I think community colleges were more in tune to this, since many of their students don't live on campus. Most of them don't. But I think it's a relatively new, if you will, wake-up call for those on residential campuses that college students as well face both food and families' housing insecurity. 1 out of 3 are witnessing race-based discrimination, having a significant impact on mental health, especially as we see news cycles 24/7, whether it's online or on television, just the nonstop negative media that we're seeing, political divisiveness, the full range. 1 out of 3 serious thoughts of suicide. 1 out of 10 engaging in self-injury, 115 attempting suicide every day. It's pretty staggering, and 1,400 dying by suicide. And yet, most of the young people on college campuses that are at the most serious risk and have the most acute situations do not present on their own to counseling services or the health center. And as we read about tragedies in the news, most of the time those students were never seen by anyone on their campus and was not known to anyone on their campus as being at risk. So in spite of the data, not a whole lot of students are actually receiving care. Next. So then COVID hit, right? And, I always say, or have recently said, if there's a silver lining about the pandemic or from the pandemic, it's the fact that, again, the light bulb has gone off, especially with senior leaders, for all of us, but very importantly for senior leaders, that mental health really is a significant issue. In fact, the American Council on Education that recently has done a pulse point survey of college presidents for the past, I believe, 3 years, mental health has been top of mind and what keeps them up at night, which is so important, because we have learned at the JED Foundation, when we work with schools, that unless the senior leadership is on board and really behind this work and promoting it, it's very difficult to move the needle on these issues in any kind of long-term systemic way. So good news that it's highlighted the need to pay attention to mental health. Bad news is that it certainly has contributed to some exacerbation of already existing mental health challenges. So this is, as I'm sure familiar to the panelists from Active Minds, since many of these points come from their survey, 2/3 of students reported feeling financial stress. So again, back to that financial insecurity, a lot of families, people lost jobs, whether it was parents or the students themselves. 60% during the pandemic really feeling worried about getting the virus themselves, and even more so that a family member, a parent, or a grandparent would contract the virus and be in serious condition. A large number, 60%, indicating that it was more difficult to access mental health care. And a lot of this stemmed from the fact that for students who are being seen on their counseling center, on campus at their counseling center, who then went home to a different state, they were unable to continue the care with their provider at school due to state licensing restrictions. And so a lot of students who were in sort of regular psychotherapy were unable to continue that. So continuity of care was severely impacted and difficult, I think, to start anew with a provider in their home. And especially if, there are families that certainly are not supportive of mental health care and therapy. So a lot of students reporting difficulty accessing or continuing care. Almost everybody reporting increased stress and anxiety. And I think it's safe to say that's all of us, not just college students. Same with the disappointment and sadness. And for students especially, this is a period of time where, young people are still struggling with, identity formation. Their most significant relationships are often with peers. And so not being able to have those really salient relationships in person certainly resulted not only in disappointment, but certainly loneliness. And as we know from the Surgeon General, loneliness is at epidemic proportions in our country, and the pandemic certainly served to exacerbate that. And many reported difficulty having a routine, which we all know that when we have a structure, it's much easier to function, and our mental health really benefits. So those were some of the downsides of the pandemic. And next. This is a lot, other ways that COVID impacted students, housing and food insecurity, which we talked about, the financial stressors resulting in having trouble paying tuition, and any other academic endeavors. And then there certainly were specific populations that were more negatively impacted: students of color, socioeconomically insecure students, some folks not having access to high-speed internet when every instruction moved to online, others not having sort of a quiet space in their home to do online learning or any academic work, LGBTQ students, many of whom went home to families perhaps that were not supportive of that identity, students with significant medical issues who may have been getting care on campus that didn't have access at home. So again, particular populations suffered even more than the general population. And I believe last slide. So, I do, as much as the pandemic really brought to the foreground the need to pay attention to mental health, I keep hearing, we have a mental health crisis in this country. I share a word of caution because I think it's easy to overlook the fact that mental health challenges have been on the rise for many years. It's not like all of a sudden when the pandemic hit, we all of a sudden started having mental health challenges. The trend has been growing for a good 10 or more years. So yes, the pandemic had a spike, but it certainly is not the cause of the rising trends in mental health. So I just think it's important to put that in a historical perspective as well, that this is not new. That increases have been seen over the years. Pandemic caused a spike. And I think I'll leave you with the thought about, there has been, I think, wishful thinking that, okay, well, now we're back on campus and we're good to go. That's not the case. And for those of you who are on college campuses, which I think is probably all of you, you know more than anyone else that the impact of the pandemic is not over, and it will have a very long tail, just like other natural disasters and catastrophes we faced in this country. If we take Katrina, for example, we're still recovering from Katrina, the trauma, the mental health challenges that resulted from any of these types of environmental and social issues. They don't go away overnight. And so I think on our campuses, we really need to be paying attention to how are we going to support our students long-term, and not pretend that, okay, now, the pandemic is subsiding and we're back to normal. And that's it.
Thanks, Nance. That was a great overview. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about community college students and mental health and some of the differences between community colleges and four-year colleges and universities. So to start with some facts that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, about 40% of college students nationally attend community colleges. And our students have a wide range of ages, from dual enrollment high school students all the way through, you name it, the upper limit of our students. And our students are also juggling multiple roles. So in addition to being students, they're working as employees, they're family members, often parents. They have a lot of family responsibilities and other responsibilities. About 2/3 of community college students work, and they average 30 hours of employment. Also, our students are generally non-residential. They're not living on campus, although some community colleges do have residence halls. In general, our students are really on the run. So it's very common for students to come to class and then go hop in their cars and run on to their next responsibility, whether that's work or home. And so we have more limited access to them. It's harder to engage them in services and programming on campus. In general, students are really very busy, very stressed, very tired. Those are some of the words that come to mind. There has been a little bit of research on mental health and community college students specifically. And the prevalence of mental health difficulties, depression, anxiety, other mental health disorders, overall is pretty similar to students at four-year universities. And as you know from what Nance said, that's a very high prevalence. The students who are traditional age, 18 to 22 at community college, have a significantly higher prevalence of mental health difficulties. So for some reason, the younger students are hit harder than the students who are a little bit older. And then we also know that students are significantly less likely to access and utilize mental health services when they're at community colleges. So about 5% of students who are accessing mental health services are accessing them on campus, compared to about 23% who are accessing them on four-year campuses. There's probably a combination of reasons for that. Community college students are living their lives in the community. That's where they're accessing a lot of their services, whether that's medical services or other kinds of services. So they're more likely to be seen in the community where they're living their lives, but also the services at community colleges for mental health are significantly less robust and less resourced than in four-year schools. So just, a little small sample right here. LaTasha mentioned having a staff of 9 at her counseling center, and I'm the primary psychologist for the students at ours, which has had a shifting enrollment between 5,000 and 9,000 over the years that I've been there. Now, having said that, we're actually lucky, I think, that we have one person dedicated to mental health at our college, because tends not to be the case. It's a lot more likely that there would be a part-time mental health counselor at a community college, or more likely there are counselors who are doing some mental health counseling on top of their other main responsibilities, which would be academic counseling, career counseling, and those kinds of things. 70% of community colleges offer some mental health services, and of those colleges, at 80% of them, the counselors are doing a bunch of other things, not just mental health counseling. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I think have worked well for us at Lakeland. It's hard for me to talk about the field as a whole, partly because community college mental health professionals don't have a professional association. We're not as organized, and so I know what some other people in Ohio are doing, but I don't have my finger on the pulse of things nationally, just because we're not as well organized. But some of the things that I think have worked well at Lakeland is, first of all, having one dedicated position for mental health has been a great way for the college to address mental health needs. And I think that when there's a professional who's pulled in multiple different directions, it just makes it a lot harder to really have an ongoing kind of an effort to address mental health across the campus. And so I think having a dedicated position is a real benefit. We also collaborate a lot with the Lake County Adams Board, which is the county mental health board. And I think this is pretty common from what I know, that at community colleges, the collaboration with county agencies, county mental health boards, is one way that they try to address the needs of students. And again, that makes sense because the students are part of the community. And so we have a very close relationship with our county mental health board. They're on our campus at our wellness events and things like that. And we have applied for grants together, and we're in touch quite a bit. We serve on their suicide prevention coalition. And so the collaboration goes a long way. A couple other things that I'll mention that have made a really big difference for us at Lakeland. There have been some statewide initiatives that we've been a part of that have really bolstered our ability to serve our students. Not so much in terms of providing additional direct services, but in terms of leveraging our resources. So there have been some statewide collaborative efforts there with some specific pots of money that were put aside where colleges and universities could, for instance, become part of the JED Foundation campus program, which is a strategic planning process. So there was one effort, it was called Ohio Healthy Campus, where 10 colleges and universities were able to access some funding through the state and also through some foundations, and were able to take part in the JED Campus Foundation, take part in the Healthy Minds survey so we could understand our students' needs better. And we basically developed a task force on our campus with people from all across campus, looking at all of the student mental health needs and what we were doing in each area, not necessarily just in terms of direct service, and looking at best practices, getting some consultation from the JED Foundation. And our task force still meets even after we finish that strategic planning process. And so that's been great for us. And then there was a Rise and Thrive initiative where 14 colleges and universities in Ohio used some of the stimulus funds through the governor's office to specifically develop community partnerships and to work on a project with a community partner. And we were able to bolster a lot of our wellness programming, in particular for students, through that. So some of those, it's not always just about, okay, we have to put another line item in the budget for a new position that's going to be renewed every year. Some of these, I think, short-term projects statewide have really made a difference for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Candace, for some wonderful initiatives and details that you gave about community colleges, some of which are also true for four-year institutions. But some things that are unique are that often with four-year institutions, we have the life cycle of students for a long period of time, with us having undergraduate and graduate programs. We may see students on campus for more than 4 and 5 years. And so when we're thinking about the mental health of students, we often find that students are wanting to cycle in and out. And so for some of my feedback I'm giving from the perspective of a counseling center director, and some of the challenges that we see and the opportunities. And so one of the things that we've done, that four-year institutions that have counseling centers or counseling and psychological services, is we've had to modify how we provide those services, because students may be on campus for 4 and 5 and 6 years and often want to have long-term therapy. Because of the resources or the staffing, we've had to modify and adapt. So you'll see things like step care approaches, triaging to be able to cycle students in quickly, to be able to better ascertain what needs do they have and how can we service those needs fairly quickly. Often schools have created session limits. So if you hear, students maybe having concern that they can only come to the counseling center in a year for 6 or 8 sessions, that's been an adaptation to be able to service as many students as possible, and especially given that there's a higher level of severity and acuity that students have. And so in that, one of the modifications that counseling centers have made is to really be thoughtful of how do we deliver the services and how quickly can we provide those services, thinking more from a brief intervention standpoint versus a long-term clinical model and option. Furthermore, in that, counseling centers have adopted group session as a modality of care, which allows us to service more students in a quicker, shorter period of time, and it's just as effective as individual services. And so as we're looking at how many students we're servicing across our campuses, it tends to be about 10%, 10 to 15% of your college population that are on campus will utilize your counseling center or are able to be serviced. And sometimes those limits are faced by our capacity. So some institutions have waiting lists just because they don't have the ability to service all of the students. And so, like as I mentioned, I do have 9 staff at the counseling center, and there's a campus of about 15,000. So we've had to make some significant modifications to be able to service as many students as possible during the time that they're at our institution. Another significant thing is that a lot of them have residential living. And so that means your campus is alive 24/7. And so with that, that means that there's resources that students may need when a lot of departments and offices are closed. And so how we then have to be prepared for crises on campus have been significantly impacted, needing to have systems in place that can be enacted when the counseling center is closed, or when some of the other departments like your division of student affairs or your dean of students may not necessarily be in their office. And so what's been happening in the last few years is there's a lot of universities that are now implementing like after hours call services so that crisis can be integrated into the resources that are accessible to campuses. So what we know is that if students are on campus, there are a lot of things that can happen on campus during that time. And so we like to make sure that we're providing resources that are integrated into the existing resources on campus. One of the great things this summer, 9 and 8 went live. And so for communities that did not have after-hour services, it's increasing access to be able to have emergency and crisis response for individuals, because as Nancy mentioned, 1 in 3 students are at risk for death by suicide in the college age population. And so what we know is crises do occur. We know that students are having suicidal ideation, they're making suicidal gestures and attempts, and then we do know that students are dying by suicide. And so it's important that we have processes in place. And so for your institutions, we often see that the life cycle of students is far and wide. So our students may be early enroll, post-secondary option, as all the way up to graduate students, which means that their needs vary very significantly. So we have some students that maybe are more of a traditional student that come from a ability to provide the finances to be able to be in school, all the way to students that might be first generation students. We have individuals that are caregiving for whether they're children or other family members. And so in that, the student is not typical when you're looking at a four-year institution. Your average student can be a graduate student, so you're thinking about the service we provide is very different than what it might be for what you give your 18-year-old freshman student from your graduate student who's in their 5th year medical program. And so with that, it's been important for us to really think about what specialties we have on our campus, who are the professionals, and for us, what we've been doing is really looking at what resources can we harvest across our campus, what relationships can we build. We had the opportunity that when the counseling center, when I came in, we were under the Division of Student Affairs. And that gave us really robust information about the experiences of students that were not coming to the counseling center. So by having that relationship, we saw students that were accessing the Office of Multicultural Student Services, students that were in residence life, students that were in Greek life. And by having those partnerships and relationships, we can hear not just quantitative data, but the qualitative data, the storytelling, the experiences, give us an opportunity to think about how we'll respond to mental health on our campuses. And so one of the things that's really wonderful about working at a university is that you have experts across your campus. And so we've been working to harvest that information from, we have a social work department, we have a counselor education program, we have a psychology department, and those individuals are not our staff at the counseling center, but they have areas of expertise that we have access to. And so to Ken's point, we are now a JED campus. We've been going through that process. And so we do have a strategic planning committee. We've been able to have people from across campus come together to talk about the needs of our campus specifically and how we want to address those needs. And so one of the important pieces is not making these decisions in a vacuum, not making these decisions from the top down or just the bottom up. It's across the board, and it gives us the opportunity to have different people at the table, including student voices. So we can't have these conversations about how we address mental health without students present. And so in that, we've had the opportunity to have some student feedback, input. We've implemented the Healthy Mind Study, and to give a better assessment of what is happening on your campus in particular. And so to that end, it's important that for us, we've been able to harvest and leverage our relationships also in the community. We were not a recipient of Rise and Thrive, but they gave us a second round funding, and we were able to use that to create our own suicide prevention campaign on our campus, utilizing our students, utilizing our resources and partnerships that we had. And so in that, it's really important that look at what you have on your campus and what will meet the needs that are being presented. And so for us, we've had the opportunity to be able to develop our own suicide prevention campaign, a training program that's been rolled out this semester, where we've now trained over 200 people on our campus and are getting requests to do more, as well as we're getting more support from our administration to continue these efforts. And so again, just mentioning some of the things that are important or thinking about crisis for your campus and how you decentralize mental health just from the counseling center, but to all levels of your organization.
And, you know, it was a nice path up there, LaTasha, when you were talking about getting students involved, because that's what I'm here to talk about. As a representative of Active Minds, our really role in the mental health college space is mobilizing students on campus. And so our organization was started about 20 years ago when our founder, Allison Melman, lost her brother to suicide as a college student. And she noticed on her campus that there were no places for a student to go to advocate for mental health policies from the bottom up, right? From the students mobilizing those grassroots efforts. She realized that there was no place to talk about the stigma around mental illness, especially back in 2003. What a wildly different time, right? And so she started something, and now we've grown to be on over 700 campuses across the country, where we have a student organization dedicated to focusing on student mental health and these students going to administration and telling them what they want to see. These students putting on events about mental health to make other students aware of the campus resources, educating them about how to take care of their mental health, and really showing that mental health is not just for people with a mental illness, right? It's a holistic thing. If I need to take care of my physical health, even though I don't have, you know, an illness of any sort. I need to go to the gym. I need to eat right. Somebody without OCD, without bipolar disorder, still needs to focus on the self-care of their mental health. And that's what our students try to teach other students through awareness campaigns as well, and then advocating for that policy change. Actually, we had the RAND study the RAND Corporation help us do a study about Active Minds back in 2018, right before the pandemic. And we found that as students became more involved with Active Minds or student groups of the like, they were more likely to reach out to a classmate or a friend who was struggling with a mental health issue. And we already know that 67% of students first reach out to a peer when they are struggling with their mental health. And so to increase that as the peers that are able to respond is important, right? That first touch point can really dictate how a student responds. And then knowledge about mental health and positive attitudes towards mental health increase as a result of Active Minds being on campus, because students saw a comfort in the culture around mental health and saw that other students cared. And so that's enough of me talking about the student perspective. I actually brought a video of one of our student representatives on our student advisory committee. Thank you for applauding Emily. Yes. One of our amazing student leaders, and really wanted to get the point across of having these virtual options for students when it comes to their mental health. And that's something she's advocating for on her campus here in Ohio. Right. I think we can move on now. I'm last, and so we can do the question if you'd like to.
Well, does anybody have questions?
Does anybody have questions here in the room, or anybody online have questions for the panelists? Barbara?
I don't need the mic. Do I? Yeah.
Yeah, you do. So I'm gonna pass.
Michael, go ahead.
Also, Michael, go on.
So
Thank you.
first Barbara, and then who's online? Michael? Great. Barbara,
Yes.
then Michael.
My question is for LaTasha. You were talking about the Healthy Mind study, and I used to work in the counseling center. Now I still do counseling, but I'm more of a full-time administrator. Would you tell me what that Healthy Mind study is?
Yeah, so, and feel free to chime in something you mentioned too that you didn't. So the Healthy Mind Study is coming through, I believe, the University of Michigan, and it asks questions. So for our university, we chose to do it for faculty, staff, and students to get an assessment on the mental health resources, needs, and kind of status in their impressions from our campus. That study will allow us to see like the kind of a baseline of their report for our campus, but then they'll also give us the norms for similar universities. So in the summer, they'll give us our information in comparison to other universities regarding like how did we measure up in the resources and services regarding mental health on our campus. So we actually just finished our study. We haven't even gone through our data yet. So we're still very early in that process. But it's for us, it came through our JED relationship. So by being a JED campus, the Healthy Mind Study was a component of that process for us to be able to do our baseline of what mental health resources and services that we currently provide in a part of our strategic plan and response. So the Healthy Mind Study gives us information so we can make informed decisions about what adjustments we need to make for our campus and how we'll respond to mental health. And by all means, if there's any, anything.
Actually, if I could just add one thing, so as was just mentioned, when a school is a JED campus, they not only take the JED assessment that looks at the school's policies, programs, and systems, but also the Healthy Minds. So Healthy Minds is a national assessment of college students' attitudes, awareness, and behaviors around mental health. And so when we work with schools and they take the Healthy Mind study at time one, we've matched specific items. And I think you can do this whether you work with JED or not, but we've matched specific items on the Healthy Mind survey with our theory of change. In other words, we want to be tracking as you're affecting systems change through your work with JED, what is the impact on student outcomes? So at time one, when you take the Healthy Mind study, you get all the data on where your students are in terms of attitudes, awareness, and behaviors. And then after you work, whether it's with JED or on your own initiative, you provide administer Healthy Minds again at time two. In our case, it's at the beginning of year 4, so that we can track, okay, for example, if your students at time one were saying, we really don't know how to recognize a sign of struggle in a friend, or what we should say, or where we should go for help. As you're working on that issue, at time two, you should be seeing different responses to those items. There's many, many, many that we track, and you can choose for your campus whatever you want to track. I bring this up because I think as a field, we don't do enough in terms of assessing the efforts that we and the initiatives that we put out on campus in terms of their impact on student outcomes. So we may put in a lot of great things or do a lot of great initiatives, but we don't really know if they're working if we're not measuring the impact on student outcomes. So I know I'm going off, but Healthy Minds really is a great tool toward that end.
Yeah, and I would just add that we have administered the Healthy Mind Survey for our students 3 times now, 2014, 2017, and 2021, and we're waiting on our most recent results. But it's very helpful to see changes over time, and it's a great way to just have our finger on the pulse of our students.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. I'm
Randy?
reading this book, Homo Deus. But anyhow, they point out in this book, Harari, who wrote Sapiens. But anyhow, he pointed out in 1985, 9 South Koreans per 100,000 killed themselves. And now in 2012, it's risen to 36 per 100,000. And in poor countries like Peru, Haiti, Philippines, and Ghana, that you don't have high suicide rates. But as our societies have progressed so along more capital, you get more. I wonder whether you really are making an impact in the decrease of suicides. If you've got it up to 1 in 3 people want to commit suicide, and the students, I have to wonder whether counseling really is effective. This because we all know that the mind is a biochemical phenomena, but why is it that gets disordered and people want to commit suicide? I've had close friends, children, and other people commit suicide, and it's shocking. But why is there an increase in this phenomena? And I think group therapy, like organizations like AA, work very, very well. Maybe we need to readdress our way that we counsel people into more of a group therapy thing that's available to all of our students.
So I'll speak to it as the Suicide Prevention National Organization. I think you're onto something when you talk about groups. I also don't think psychotherapy, whether it's group or individual, is necessarily the answer. I think it's helpful for many people, but I think if we really want to move the needle on promoting mental health and reducing suicide, we need to develop caring, compassionate cultures for people to live in and grow up in, whether it's in our colleges and universities, our high schools. But, that old saying, it takes a village. I mean, it's truly, we know the Surgeon General's stuff on loneliness. I mean, these are the things I think that contribute in a significant way, not to mention the horrors of our world right now with racial hate crimes, political divisiveness, climate change, school shootings. I mean, you say, we live in progressive or whatever societies. I think we're in a regressive society, actually. I think the things that our young people are having to face growing up are unprecedented. And I do think that the lack of really a culture of caring and compassion, holding environments that support them across the board, not in a psychotherapy office.
I think the loss of family is the biggest reason for this increase in suicide. But actually violence, if you want to know, has gone out of the 56 million people that died in 2012, only 5% died from violence, whereas we had 800,000 die from suicide, and we had 1.5 million people die from diabetes. So I mean, to put it in the context, it's a drastic problem, and I've seen it so many times, and I remember being in the Navy addressing veterans that commit suicide, and that is increasing daily too. So I mean, I empathize with all your thrusts, but I don't know whether we're making any advances.
Thank you, Randy. Really appreciate your comments. Michael, do you still have a question?
Yes, I do, if I may. Thank you, presenters, and thank you, Emily, for that video presentation as well. So while we're throwing around all these statistics and numbers, I'm sure some of my colleagues are also aware that American Council of Education put out a report in 2021 on the well-being of minoritized students with minoritized identities, and the additional barriers and disparities, I think, in access and in service delivery to those individuals as well. But the theme I've been hearing, I think, in this presentation about culture and about family, even, Randy, and about it takes a village, suggests the need for an institutional response that is not solely, I think, the purview of just the mental health professionals or the counseling department. And I'm not sure it's true in your cases, but I think there is too often a dichotomy between what is student affairs and what is academic affairs. And a lot of times these issues are considered student affairs issues. But in Emily's example, perfectly illustrates the need for the institutional academic side of things to be proactive in addressing how the ways we've always done things, whether it's the way we teach, the way we conduct our classes, the way we assess students, the kinds of exams that we do, needs to be addressed as well. And I think one colleague of mine put it best: you can have a robust curriculum, you can have rigor without so much stress and without so much pressure. So I'm curious if any of the panelists have experiences or examples of working in tandem with academic affairs in trying to impact the academic side of things, the teaching and learning experience that is sometimes so much a part of the mental health root cause.
You know, I want to just point out there is one group you might be interested in talking with. It's the acronym is FAN. It's the Flourishing Academic Network. And the principal folks that started it are UVA and Stanford. And they're a group of academicians, really, faculty members from a variety of universities. I'm also on their committee, and Daniel Eisenberg from Healthy Minds as well, but we're the only two sort of not with an institution, if you will. And they have developed a course, and it's not like a 101 on mental health. It's integrating it into whether you're teaching a science class or a math class or a language class, how to embed this sort of mental health culture, if you will, into the academic curricula. It's in its infancy stages, but I think it is going to be a really useful initiative that will shed light on how to do this well. As some of the other panelists mentioned, and certainly the ones that are working with JED, you know, one of the things we very much move away from health and counseling centers. Not to say they don't have an important role to play, but they are only one very small cog in a very large wheel. And faculty are the front lines, frankly. I mean, they're the people that students admire the most and look up to the most, and are going to the most, whether they're prepared or not. So really engaging faculty is key in this work for sure.
We're going to go about an additional 5 minutes. We're supposed to wrap up at about 11, but it looks like there's still robust conversation here. I know Michael's got a comment he'd like to make, maybe Larry, but this actually tells me that we need to follow up probably with an additional panel discussion, because we've got such great resources here. I think this is a recorded session, and then some of the resources that have been offered today will also be made available, but this surely tells me that there's more interest. Michael?
Yes, thank you, Susan. Yeah, I was gonna comment on Michael's, because I agree with you 100%, Michael. And what we did in Lake Area is we started off with, one of the first things that I tell the students is you need to make a friend. You know, the college is tough, but we have our faculty has been trained in resilience, how to help the students. Because, you know, we've had issues, you know, when somebody gets a mark up their paper, and they realize, they need to realize the teacher's doing that to help you, not because they don't like you. And so all those types of things, and we put our faculty through suicide prevention training as a whole, and that's not, I shouldn't say faculty, because we do it with our staff as a whole, and talk about that everybody's responsible for student success. But yeah, we found that we needed to put mental health down in the same category as, do your students have food? Do they have clothing? Do they have transportation? And it's at the same level, and it's the same level of services when we look at wraparound, but then we incorporate it into with our faculty also.
And I want to comment on what you shared, and also, so for us at our university, we saw very similar where faculty were disconnected from the student affairs side. And so, as I mentioned, we developed our own suicide prevention campaign and training, partly because what was happening was, if a faculty member was engaging with a student, they would immediately say, stop talking, you need to go somewhere else. They didn't see themselves as part of the solution. And it was causing a lot of disruption for the services across campus, because one, it was not creating a caring community at our school, as well as students will often feel a disconnect from their faculty, because they would literally say, you need to go to counseling center, you know, they would stop them from talking. And some of the issues were not crisis, it was just them sharing an experience. And so we wanted to equip our faculty, our staff, and our students with information to be able to engage in these caring conversations, to know how to engage with any individuals and then ask about suicide, and then know what resources are available to them on campus and in the community. And so we felt like it was really imperative to do this, a grassroots effort. We just started in January this year when we were able to get the funding, and we rolled it out this semester. But that was our response to say, we cannot keep, you know, putting everything on the counseling center. It's everyone's job to address mental health and well-being for our students, but we have to equip them to be able to do that. And so that was one effort that we made. Another is that another individual on the academic side, they've started a program called Equity Champions. I believe it's normed off of it. It might be similar to the FAM program, but they have a group of faculty, anyone that teaches the class is eligible to be a part of this program. And what they do is they meet at least once a week, and then they do trainings, talk about how to make your class an equitable classroom. And so in that, this year, they've invited the counseling center to come talk about mental health, to infuse that into part of the education and training, so that they can adapt their classroom methods and their interventions around that into the different things they're learning and making their classrooms equitable. What they found is that the results for the program they were doing prior to mental health is that their feedback from students was much more positive, because they had they looked at their academic rigor in a different way, and versus just saying, let's make sure you know these particular pieces of information, but let's make sure that we're attending to the whole student. And so those are a few initiatives that have been happening on our campus that I think are bridging that gap between the student affairs side and the academic unit, and including mental health.
Well, thank you, Markie, for sharing the video about Emily, because it brought me back to reality in South Dakota. We had a young man that came to this university, basketball player, star, intense, freshman. He was outstanding. Came back his sophomore year. Expectations were higher. And mid-season, he decided he needed to check in to the mental hospital. The coach stood by him. The team stood by him. But he was a star, mentally extremely brilliant. I sat next to his grandmother in the stands, and we talked about him, how when he chose to come to state was because it was closer to home. He really didn't want to move away to Ohio. I'm sorry, but he was recruited at Wright State, you know, and he would have been a great star there, but he had a lot of things going on with his mind. And to have the strength to do that on his own in consultation with the coach. Coaches aren't taught to be counselors necessarily, but the coach stood by him and helped him walk through the process. So I love the video, but it impacts everybody, even the star.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think this is a good time to wrap. There's so much more that we could talk about. I know. Let's give a round of applause and thanks. We will be looking, we'll tap you again in the near future, probably to follow up. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, everybody.